In this video, we will show you how to replace your ignition coil protective boot on this Jeep Grand Cherokee with a 3.6 liter engine. You'll have 3 of these located on each bank of your engine. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Start by removing your upper engine cover. For this, you can just lift up on it and pull it out of place. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. Now you're going to have 3 ignition coils along this side of the engine directly under here. The other 3 are going to be underneath your plastic intake on the driver's side. Before you start removing anything else, it's important to make sure you remove as much of this debris as possible from along the top of the engine. We'll use some compressed air for this. Now we can start removing our air inlet tube from along the front of the engine. We'll be starting over close to our air filter housing box here. You'll find you have an 8mm headed clamp that you can loosen by either using an 8mm or even a flathead screwdriver. We'll loosen this just enough that we can slide it out of place. Once you've dislodged that, we're going to follow this over heading towards the engine. We're going to find that you have a wiring harness that should be attached down along this area. You can see the top of it protruding up from there. You just want to go ahead and pry that out of place. Ours has already been broken, but typically you slide it out. A quick inspection. If yours is broken during the installation process, we'll just use a wire tie to hold it in place. Now we'll continue following this up this area. For this, you just want to take hold of it and you should be able to slide it towards the center of the engine, sliding it out of place from its bracket. Let's pause over here and make our way directly along the backside. You can see another wiring harness there. It has a red locking tab. To disconnect your air temp sensor, we're going to slide that red tab out of the way, squeeze in on this, and pull it out of place. A quick inspection for corrosion, of course. You can use pretty much anything as a small prying device for this. I just have a trim tool. Use a screwdriver if necessary. That looks good. Now just behind that area, we have another 8mm headed clamp. Once again, you can use a flathead screwdriver if necessary. Now we can take hold of this. We'll give it a little wiggle, pulling it away from the throttle body and remove it from the vehicle. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. With that out of the way, we've exposed the 3 ignition coils that are on the passenger side of the engine. Now, if you are only doing one of these 3 for some reason, you can just go ahead and disconnect the electrical connector, remove the mounting bolt, and slide it up and out of place. Now, since there are another 3 on the other side of the engine that are located underneath the air intake plenum, we're going to remove that as well to show you that process. Let's gain focus on the throttle body. We're going to disconnect the electrical connector. Before we do, let's dislodge it from its mounting point right up along here. Just use a small prying device. I'm using my trim tool. To disconnect the electrical connector, you can see that it has a red locking tab. You just want to go ahead and carefully start pulling that away. Squeeze on that and disconnect it. A quick inspection for corrosion and we'll set it aside. That looks great. Tuck that right back here. Let's continue on dislodging our wiring harness here. Just slide that out of place. There we are. Now if you were to look just behind this area, you're going to find a hose that presses down on. You can just pry that right up and off of there. As you make your way along the backside, this should be mounted on. As you can tell, ours pretty much just pop free, but typically you can pop it up and off of there. This piece should just slide right up and off. Now let's take this whole thing and we'll swing it forward. Let's reach right over the top of that throttle body, and now we can disconnect our map sensor. For this, you just go ahead and squeeze on the tab, pull it out of place. Of course, a quick inspection for corrosion, and we'll set that wiring aside. Staying in this area with our small prying device, we're going to slide this vacuum hose off of here. Once you have it out of place, just give it a quick squeeze, make sure it's soft and pliable. We'll set that aside. Just underneath that area, you're going to find a 10mm headed mounting nut. We'll remove that mounting nut. Now that we have that nut off of there, let's follow this metal bracket rearward, and you're going to find another 10mm nut right back here. Use a swivel, a long extension, 10mm. Now we can take hold of that metal bracket, and we're going to slide it out and away. It still has a wiring harness attached to it. Just rest that right down here. Now let's make our way down along the driver's side of the intake here. Right along the side, you can see two brackets. The intake is held in place with studs and 10mm nuts. We'll remove each of these two 10mm nuts. You can see one right here along the front. If you were to follow it down towards the back, there's the second one right down in this area. There's one. Now we can get the second one. There's our second one, looks the same as the first. Now we can start dislodging the upper intake from the lower intake. This is held in place with 7 8mm mounting bolts. Some of them are going to be fairly out in the open. Others will be up towards the center of the intake, buried inside of ports. And then there's also a 7th bolt all the way in and behind the throttle body here. Let's start removing these mounting bolts. Now these bolts typically do stay inside the intake. You can leave these just right in here. We'll continue on. Once you have everything loose, let's continue on to taking hold of the manifold. We're going to lift it up slightly, bring it towards the passenger side to remove it from the side brackets on the driver's side, and remove it from the vehicle. Along the back side of the intake, you're going to find another hose. It's a lot easier to remove at this point. You can just reach right on back here and disconnect it, either from right here or along the back of the intake. It should just want to slide right out of there. Once you have it off of there, we'll just give that a quick squeeze, of course. Remove this, set it aside. Now that we have the intake off of there, it's important to make sure that you cover this area so no debris falls inside of your engine. That can cause catastrophic engine damage. Continuing from here, you can start removing your ignition coils. The process for one is the exact same thing as all others at this point. To start removing the ignition coil, start with the electrical connector. Squeeze in on the locking tab, remove it, a quick inspection for corrosion of course, and we'll set that wiring aside. Continuing from there, we have a 10mm headed mounting bolt. Go ahead and remove that. That bolt will stay inside with that ignition coil. We'll lift this up and out. All right, there's that. Now we can get this over to the bench. On the bench, the next thing we need to do is remove the boot from the coil itself. There's going to be a small coil that runs through the center here. Once you have that separated, you just want to ensure you can see the coil inside this area. And then double check the bottom area of the ignition coil itself, the pack. We want to ensure there's nothing inside there. Continuing on, it's time to put the coil inside of our ignition coil boot right down here. It's only going to slide in so far. On the very end, you should have some dielectric grease here. This will help keep moisture out of the area. We'll press that right on there. Once you have it pressed on, just give it a quick twist. Continue on with some dielectric lubricant right in this area as well. Let's get this over to the vehicle. Continue on to sliding this in place, aligning it with the spark plug located inside of the tube and also your mounting bolt port. We'll press this on. Once you feel as though you have it bottomed out with the engine, go ahead and start in that mounting bolt by hand. We'll snug it up. The torque for this is 71 inch-pounds. Double check, make sure it's properly secured. We'll continue on with the electrical connector. For the electrical connector, just go ahead and take it, align it, press it in, listen for a click. Once you've heard that click, give it a light tug, making sure that it's properly secured. Now, as I mentioned before, the process for one ignition coil is the exact same thing as all others. Once you've completed the ignition coils that you intend on replacing, you can continue on back at the center of the engine. Looking in the center of the engine here, we're going to focus on our gaskets. You'll find that there's 6 of them. Typically, it's a good idea to replace them, but you at least need to go ahead and remove them, wipe them down, and give them a close inspection. If it looks like they're hardened, torn, worn, or damaged in any way, you need to replace them. When I do this, I typically don't like to do it over the ports leading into the engine just in case any debris falls down. We'll just give this a light tug, ensuring that it's not ripped or anything. This looks fine. It's still soft and pliable. I'm going to reuse this. Before I slide it into position, let's go ahead and wipe down the intake inside the port where it needs to slide into. We'll align it and carefully press it down into the fully seated position. Once you've done one, repeat the process for all others. Now that we're done with the seals, let's make our way over to the bottom of the intake. Looking at this, you're going to find 6 ports. Those ports are exactly where those seals will sit, so we need to give it a quick wipe and an inspection. As we're cleaning this, we're making sure nothing falls inside of the ports. Once again, we don't want anything making its way into the engine which can cause damage. That looks good. When we go to slide the intake into position, remember we had that hose that needs to connect in along the back side of the intake, so we'll be putting that on first. As we start bringing it down into the proper position, we also need to bring it towards the driver's side to slide those mounting studs that are on the intake into the mounting brackets. As we're sliding this into position, we're making sure nothing falls into the engine. Once again, super important. Before we get too far towards the back side, let's make sure we reinstall that hose. We're going to press it on there as far as possible. It needs to be secured. Continuing on, we're going to take this, shift it, and slide those studs into their mounting brackets along the driver's side. Once you have that slid in, we're going to lower the center down into the proper position, aligning all of our mounting bolts. You can see everything looks like it's lined up. Continuing from here, it's always a good idea to try to start in as much of the bolts as you can by hand. After you have all of the mounting bolts started in, we're going to snug them up and torque them in a specific sequence. Now that they're started in, we're going to snug them and then torque these to 89 inch-pounds in that sequence. The sequence for this is going to be starting all the way at that rearward mounting bolt behind the throttle body. After you've completed that, we're going to start moving forward to this bolt right here, then this one that's out in the open. Continuing in the center, moving rearward, we'll go here, and then this one close to the throttle body. After that, we're going to make our way all the way towards the front on the center, and then right here. After they're all snug, torque them to 89 inch-pounds, and then go ahead and repeat that process one last time to confirm everything's properly secured. Just one in there. Torque these. Okay, let's repeat that process. Now that we've completed torquing in the center, let's make our way over towards the driver's side. We have to put those 10mm mounting nuts onto those mounting studs. You can see the first one right here. Let's start on the second one, all the way towards the back there, on the other mounting bracket. All right, they're started on. Let's go ahead and snug them up. Right there is bottomed out. Just make sure it's nice and tight. Make our way down to the next one here. Bottomed out, nice and snug. Let's make our way over towards the driver's side. We have that bracket along the back side of the intake there, just behind the throttle body. For this, we're going to take it, slide it over the mounting studs, and then start on those 10mm mounting nuts. Once they're on there, just go ahead and snug them up. Make sure they're nice and tight. You can see the bracket here and our mounting stud out in the open. The other one's located just behind there. We want to try to get everything lined up. Press it right on there. Make sure you can see both studs protruding through their corresponding holes on the bracket on each of these areas. Once it's on there, we've got our mounting nuts. Let's go ahead and start them on, snug them up. They're started on, let's snug them up. there's nice and tight. Now I just want to have a quick peek in this area. It's common to accidentally dislodge your plastic locking clips. If it did dislodge, just go ahead and take hold of it and slide it right on over that tube. You can see it moving around down there. There we are, we've got it pressed on there. You can see it all the way in there. We'll just double check, make sure that's properly secured in place. Now we can get our hose onto the intake. This is going to slide right on, press it on there as far as possible. Once you have it on, give it a tug. If it feels like it wants to slide off on you, just go ahead and use a wire tie. We want to make sure it's properly secured. Now while we're back in this area, let's reinstall our electrical connector up along the top area here. We'll take this and press it right into position along the back side of that throttle body on the intake itself. Press it in, listen for a click. We'll give it a light tug. Continuing on, we need to also secure the wiring harness. That's just going to make its way right along here. We'll slide that into the lock position. Now we can reconnect our throttle body right along the front of the throttle body. We'll take this electrical connector, press it in, listen for a click. After you've heard the click, a light tug, lock it down with the red locking tab. We'll lock down this as well. Now it's time for our evap hose. That's going to go onto the intake right along this back area here. Once you've slidden the boot down on as far as you can, we'll also be mounting it in this area here. Press that all the way on. A light tug. If it falls off, just use a wire tie. Now we have our mounting point on the top of the intake. Just go ahead and press this right on there. Double check, make sure it's properly secured in place. Now it's time for our air inlet tube. As we bring this into position, we're going to have to lift this up and out of the way. Of course, we will have the mounting point that we'll be sliding this onto. Bring this over. We're going to align it with our throttle body. We'll press that on there as far as possible. Let's make our way all the way to the far end now. We have the area where it connects onto the air filter housing. We'll press that on once again as far as possible. Tighten your 8mm headed mounting clamp. Make sure that's nice and tight. Let's move back towards the throttle body for that mounting clamp. Double check, make sure it's nice and tight. Let's reconnect our electrical connector. For this, we're going to take it, we'll press it into place. A quick wiggle, lock it down. One last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our engine cover. When installing the engine cover, we want to pay attention to all of our mounting points. You can see them along the top of the intake and on the air inlet tube. The engine cover itself, if you were to look along the bottom, you're going to find that you have the ports for each one of those areas. We'll align this and press it down into the proper position. Once you feel as though you have it down, just give it a quick wiggle. You want to make sure this isn't rattling around on you while you're driving down the road. Okay, friend, we finished the installation of our ignition coil. The next thing you need to do is go ahead and hop in the passenger compartment, start up your vehicle, let it run for a short while. Ensure you have no misfire, no check engine light, close the hood, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.